My name is Judrai and this is my printmaking sketchbook video evaluation. So to start off with this module, I first created a quick mind map, basically writing down all the printing techniques that I know as well as some artists. The first printing technique that we experimented with was monoprinting. So to start off, I first created a couple of skull images along with a landscape that I took from a magazine. What I found really interesting about these landscape images, especially with this one, was the reverse one, because I thought once I transferred it into black and white, the piece really stood out and looked really interesting. I then did some artist research on various artists who also experiment with monoprinting. The next printing technique that we experimented with was transfer print. Now this is the first time I ever looked at transfer print before I even know what it was. I thought that this one was also turned out really well. I thought this one turned out really well because I then drew over it afterwards, so I thought made the piece really stand out, and also burnt the edges of the paper just to give it a bit of a rustic effect. The next printing technique that I then experimented with was etching, and now this is probably one of my favourite prints that I produced using this technique, just because I thought that the texture and like different lines created looked really interesting and really worked together. I think this was the first printing technique that I did that I properly developed my prints further by photocopying them on different paper textures, and then this print I even took it digitally by editing it and adding colour to it. I then also did some more artist research on people who experiment with etching. The next printing technique that I then moved on to look at was lino printing. I really enjoyed doing lino printing, however I thought this was probably one of the more tedious printing techniques to do, because you have to then map out the image you're going to produce and then break it down into layers and then cut it out onto a sheet of lino. However, I think once you take the time to do it, you can create some really interesting prints. I then also did a rubbing of my lino cuts, and I thought they also turned out quite interesting. Moving on now, I then looked at stencil prints, where I cut out an image on a piece of card and then using a very thick ink printed them onto various papers. This is probably the first print technique that I did when I realised how in some cases you have to use various amounts of ink, like here where I didn't use enough and the print didn't turn out well at all. Again, I struggled with the same problem with the screen prints, where I didn't use enough ink. However, I think these two prints turned out really well and are two very strong images. I then further used this screen printing technique to colour ink and experimented that on different surfaces, mainly coloured magazine, just because I think it looks really interesting. I then moved on to look at silk screen printing, and similar to regular screen printing, this technique you just paint directly onto the mesh screen and then print that using acrylic medium. Now I thought for quite a simple printing technique you can create some really nice results, Like, I really like this one because I thought like the colours blended together really makes the piece look interesting. I then moved on to look at woodcut, where I carved in a design into a piece of wood and then printed it onto various images. I thought that this print turned out really well because I just think that the ink was probably the strongest on this print, and the definition of the rose really stood out. I then created some more etching prints, this time adding a bit more ink than I did last time and experimenting by not rubbing off as much, which created this really nice black border and more of a misty effect to the image. I then moved on to start playing my final pieces, deciding what printing techniques I was going to use, and I inevitably decided to use screen print, transfer print and etching. Following my theme that I decided to look at, I then started creating, taking lots of photos of pine cones, just because I thought that pine cones could work really well with all three printing techniques. I found these images here to be the strongest, and there was a few of them in particular that I thought could work really well with each printing technique. I then created a Pinterest page using various artists and images for inspiration that I've kind of built up over this period of time looking at this project. Then moving on to producing my final pieces, these were the two transfer prints that I did, besides the one that I used for my actual final piece. Now the transfer print one, I think this is the one where I had a proper dilemma between which one I was going to use for my final piece. It was between the one that I did decide in the end and this one, just because I thought that the colour and the faded effect in this one looked really interesting. These were the other two prints that I then produced for my etching final piece. I decided to not go with any of these two in the end just because I thought they looked a bit messy, and I just thought that the images themselves didn't look as strong as the one that I did for my final piece. However, I did kind of like them, so I decided to develop them further by photocopying them on different papers and then drawing on top of them to see how they turned out. And I quite like this one where I gave it a border just because I thought it added more of an urban look to it. These were the other two prints that were produced when doing the silk screen prints. I just thought that, again, these two weren't as strong as the one that I decided to pick my final piece. However, I did quite like the faded effect to them. I think it gives them more of like a kind of like shadowiness to them. But then with my final pieces, I then framed them and took photographs and wrote about each one individually, what I thought was strong about them, why I think they turned out well and whatnot. But that's the end of my video evaluation. Thank you for watching.